What's up? I am David Long. I'm here today to share a note called Creative Integral Friction. It's an open note to Corey DeVos. The origin of this note is that I posted a little while back on Facebook, and I said, challenge, criticize Ken Wilber's ideas and see how many people start attacking you personally and what percent actually deal with the points. He commented on that, and we've been having this sort of back and forth, and this is the latest response to his last response. You can check all this out on Facebook. I'll put a link down below. That conversation is public on my wall, so it should be accessible to anybody who wants to look at it, and you can also read what he said as well. But let's just jump right into it. Here's the note. Dear Corey, I have summarized all your points in a way I hope is true to your original post. If I miss anything or get anything wrong, please let me know. My summary looks like this, but I will also quote you in places as well. 1. Heat, respect, good interpersonal hygiene. 2. Busyness. Corey didn't respond to my points, and Ken's greatest contribution is a solid integral methodology. 3. A meta-theory is by its nature content-free. 4. Ken's view when he uses his methodology is his other contribution. 5. Ken's library is big and he has read a lot. 6. Corey sees my criticisms of Ken as picking nits. 7. It's silly calling yourself more integral than the guy who invented the methodology. 8. It's not a cult of personality. 9. Many of his critics are strawmanning him or caught in some little detail. 10. All philosophers have been wrong at some point. Who cares? So that's my summary of Corey's last response to me, and now I'm about to go into those points. I've been thinking a lot how to best respond to you, Corey, and because I have been busy, it has taken me a little while to get back to you. I'm sorry about that. I decided to make this a note and also an audio track so that we can better comment, share, and find it. I'm also kind of torn between wanting to be gracious about your response and feeling frustrated by your response. In one sense, I do feel like you have gotten straight to the point, to the heart of trying to figure out what I'm actually saying, and I appreciate that. I appreciate all that you have put on the table to try and figure out what exactly is going on with all of my disagreements and issues. I feel like once we make these things clear, we will be able to move on skillfully in a very pointed way. I think you're a great friend and business partner to Ken. I think you are loyal and hardworking, and he is truly blessed to have you. As much as you are blessed to have him, I know I would want a friend as loyal, passionate, and hardworking as you. On the other hand, it does feel like the same unskillful, dismissive, unhealthy thing I see integralists doing over and over again, ignoring all the important points and making it personal. Like we don't really want to have peer review. In fact, no one is actually considered to be Ken's genuine peer. He's put up on this pedestal as the guy who figured it out, and who are you to criticize? And at the same time, if he's wrong, well, he's just a human, and so what? It seems like you want to have it both ways. It seems like no matter what, you dismiss criticism. Either the critic is not mature enough to be critical, or so what if Wilber's wrong? And I'm surprised that people find this Old Testament style appeal to authority skillful. Your response reminds me of the book of Job, where Job insists that he has done nothing wrong to deserve all that he has lost, and his friends are telling him, well, you must have done something. And Job is like, if I've done anything, let God come down and say it to my face. And then God does show up, and instead of dealing with his points, because he actually has been a good servant, God's just like, are you big? Are you powerful? Did you create the world? No. Then shut up. Your version is, do you think you've read more than Ken? You think you're more mature, more enlightened? Did you create integral theory? No. Then shut up and know your place. Remember, the original post was, challenge, criticize Ken Wilber's ideas and see how many people start attacking you personally and what percent actually deal with points. And in my note, I share this great graph made by Paul Graham called the hierarchy of disagreement, where at the bottom is something like name-calling and ad hominems, and at the top is refuting the central point. The other thing I was struggling with in terms of wanting to respond to you has to do with both wanting to try and keep the length of my response down and also wanting to deal with all of your points. Quoting you, it's important to me that you feel I have addressed all of your points and that I'm not putting words in your mouth. Often that makes a response even longer because I would end up including everything you wrote as well as all my responses, and that can just be overwhelming to even look at. So I know this is kind of long, but I'm actually trying to keep it short and still deal with all your points. As long as it takes to read or listen, I guarantee it took 10 times longer to write or make this video. But okay, here we go. Number 1. Heat, respect, and good interpersonal hygiene. First, let me say that in terms of heat, clearly I am very passionate about these subjects. I know you are too, Corey, so if there is heat, it is in relation to the subject, and a general theme of seeing lots of integralists who are critical being ignored and dismissed. In many cases, integral is less skillful than even a rational community because it is constantly ignoring all the points, attacking critics personally, and in most rational communities, that is considered the worst type of fallacy. In those communities, peer review is actually welcome. We need to better synthesize the best of Orange into our community because these issues with communication are not skillful. It's shameful, it's not respectful, it's dismissive, and we should expect better from integralists. Claiming to be more mature is never a good argument. If one is actually more mature, then they can explain, and the more mature one is, the better the explanation should be. Maybe the person we're talking to won't totally be able to grasp the final point, but for example, I wouldn't say to a fundamentalist, I am more mature than you, I'm stage 8 integrally informed, and you're only at stage 4 traditional conformist, so shut up and know your place. But I might say, if you really want to get what I'm talking about with this integral stuff, you are going to have to learn to take on and value a more objective methodology. Then you will have to learn the strengths and limits of that methodology. Start to include other types of methodology, also understanding their strengths and weaknesses as well. At that point, we can sort through a lot of these ideas in a way that is not ignoring and rejecting a bunch of important factors. And from there, our view of goodness and truth has more clarity. If you like, I can give you some very practical examples that you should be able to relate to. And from there, if they're interested, you can transition right into some street epistemology. That is something that one can actually engage with. At least with a reasonable explanation, one could be like, show me what you mean, and then the person can give examples. It might be over their head, but they can at least start to learn. At that point, the ball is in their court to step up, whereas if you just claim to be higher and ask people, well, how many books have you read or written? That is more like trying to win or protect one's own ego by putting others down, more than it is real, open, honest engagement. It's crazy to me that so many integralists act like they know about psychology, but then want to make assumptions about people based on very little information. They feel so wise because they can put others down in a smart-sounding way. But at the end of the day, skillful means is not quoting the map or trying to cram people you don't even know into boxes. It's about using that knowledge to be actually skillful and effective in engaging with people and the world in a way that helps us all to move and grow. In the note, I include this picture of Freud and the psychological fallacy of this meme. You are psychologizing people instead of dealing with their actual points. This is an ad hominem fallacy. Integral is so advanced that it has hybrid fallacies. This one is a combination of ad hominem, red herring, and a strawman fallacy. That being said, I do think you have given me an opportunity to clear up some of these issues that I've been wanting to bring to the table. You're asking, what is it exactly I'm claiming? Where is it coming from in terms of my own intention, and why does it really matter? Which are all really important questions to really understand where I'm coming from. I feel like until we flesh these things out, we will not really be on the same page enough to have mutual respect. We won't be able to build together or feel like we are really caring about and engaging in the same project. I hope to show you that we are, both talking about the same project, and I don't think it's out of ego for either of us. I think we are having this conversation out of deep care and concern for the truth and goodness, the integrity, reputation, skillfulness, and effectiveness of our movement. I really hope that from here we can come together and make the peer review, our community, our reputation, and our movement even better. Let it start with us. Let's start an integral project that works in favor of peer review and shows the world that integral can process tensions better than anything, because it can. We have the methodology. My life goal is to do everything I can to help birth a healthy integral age, and there are lots of different projects to do within that. I don't see myself as the leader. I see myself as a servant leader and an active member of the integral community of the adequate. I see it as my responsibility to stand up and lead by example, and shout from the heart, as Ken might put it. And therefore, if you have seen, you simply must speak out. Speak out with compassion, or speak out with angry wisdom, or speak out with skillful means, but speak out you must. Ken Wilber. I take these things really seriously. You will see. I know you take it seriously too, so let's be honest and really try to figure out what's going to be good for our shared goals. I appreciate the positive creative friction I feel in this ongoing conversation we have been having, Corey, and I am really proud that you and I can lead by example in this way. Respect, brother. I actually think really having a shared vision matters. We might have different perspectives and there will always be disagreements, but especially if we generally agree on a common map and methodology, we should be mostly coming to the same conclusions. And when we don't, we should be very interested in those areas of disagreement. In fact, clearing up those confusions is the cutting edge of clarity. And this is how we as a community need to evolve and refine as well. Through this kind of creative friction and open and honest engagement. This is where the integral community should be spending a good amount of its time. I mean, if we can't skillfully talk to each other, learn, and refine, then how can we be expected to deal with people who agree with us even less down the spiral, let alone build an integral world together? And if we come across as condescending to people who agree with us, imagine how we must sound to people who we translate down to. We have already agreed that the integral community is still very green. I see pre-trans confusion everywhere, embracing difference and asking, why does it even matter? False attempts at consensus instead of actually integrating diversity with discernment. They have turned my father's house into a den of charlatans and thieves. And with that, all the unhealthy red, blue, orange, and green seep right in. Yikes. I know you see this as a problem too, Corey. We have our reasons if we come to different conclusions. We would have to explore those reasons and interrogate their validity to get a better idea if those reasons are good or not, and if it follows that what we believe is true. As we know, we have to understand what is true in order to be good. We are good for what is true. Intentions and understanding both really matter if we want our goodness to be sustainable. If we are going to continue to push the cutting edge and actually be better, that means we have to have a more and more clear shared vision. Saving the biosphere depends first and foremost on human beings reaching mutual understanding and unforced agreement as to common ends. And that intersubjective accord only occurs in the noosphere. Anything short of that noospheric accord will continue to destroy the biosphere. Ken Wilber. 2. Busyness. Corey didn't respond to my points, and Ken's greatest contribution is a solid integral methodology. I'm actually glad that you admit that you didn't really respond to my points, and we see later why. You're trying to get to the bottom of all of this, and you think, quote, methodology is a great thing to debate. View, not so much, because it is by nature a very slippery and subjective thing, as there are as many views in the universe as there are cosmic addresses, end quote. I'm wondering, on your view, what is the point of having a good methodology if it doesn't get us a correct or good view? It seems to me that the way we would know if a methodology was good or not would have something to do with if it was a reliable way of getting at truth or goodness or whatever the methodology is trying to achieve. And if we agree on the methodology but come to different conclusions, it seems there must be important factors left out, or that the person applied the method incorrectly. Like scientists apply their methodology, and at the end of the day, they mostly agree about the conclusion. The point is to establish understandings that we can build on, and you seem to want to reduce everything back to subjectivity. But that seems to negate the point of having good methodology. You want to say that Wilber has contributed a really important methodology, but what's the point if at the end of the day we're just going to say that it's all subjective and our conclusions don't matter? What is the point of this integral project if we can't establish agreements, refine our view, and get closer to what is actually good or true? If the point is just us feeling so smart and mature, then it seems more like a self-righteous power ego trip than a real movement that can help us come together and make the world a better place for everyone. I do agree that Ken's greatest contribution is a solid integral methodology, although we also agree that most so-called integralists don't actually know the theory. So while you and I might think that, is that what is actually making the most impact? It appears to me that Wilber's personal view is what blocks integral theory from being taken seriously by rigorous philosophers and academia, and often that overshadows his methodology. Which of Ken Wilber's books would you say is just pure methodology undistorted by Ken Wilber's personal views? It's great to have a solid methodology, but what's the point if you break your own rules in favor of your personal preference? Again, what's the point of having a good methodology if it doesn't actually get us a good or true view? And at the end of the day, you're just going to retreat into subjectivity. Number 3, a meta-theory by its nature is content-free. Corey, you say this methodology has unfolded through various phases in Ken's career, and its current form is, as far as I can tell, more or less unassailable. And this contribution, note, is not a theory, even though we often use the shorthand integral theory. It's a meta-theory, which is fundamentally different and by its nature is content-free. It is not a theory itself, it is a way of integrating multiple theories simultaneously. End quote. I'm wondering what you mean by content-free. How could something content-free be useful? Meta-theories are theories about theories. They lay out interpretive and definitional rules for a theory or a set of theories. That is their content. The theories to which they refer are theories about things or states of affairs, and are only useful if they lead to accurate conclusions and clearer understandings of the subjects in question. Corey, you seem to be using meta-theory as a term for the concatenation of a bunch of theories or lenses. But that slamming together of different theories is useless unless it follows a certain set of meta-theoretical rules that allow for their fluid and practical use, rather than picking the theory that helps to arrive at the pre-approved conclusion without satisfying the criteria laid out by the other theories. This is no better than those people who tell you Christianity says, or science says, or traditions maintain, only using the parts that support their view and ignoring the rest while they crow about its success and unassailability. Corey, you say, quote, "It's always important to differentiate the methodology from the view. And what I see you doing is, unsurprisingly, disagreeing with Ken's view while using his methodology and then calling yourself more integral," end quote. That's not really an accurate representation of what I'm saying. I argue that Ken breaks his own rules in several ways. So it's not just a simple disagreement with his view. I disagree with his application, or better yet, his lack of application of the methodology, and thus I disagree with his view. I am saying my view is more integral, not only because it seems I have more and or better data, but also because I don't break the rules of the methodology to integrate in my own preferences. If the data is more representative of what is actually going on in the territory, the view is better. And if the integration is more true to the methodology, the view is more true to integral theory. Corey, you say, quote, "This methodology in its current form is, as far as I can tell, more or less unassailable," end quote. One would have to be true to the methodology to reap its benefits. And again, I am wondering how you know this methodology is unassailable if we're not basing it on the standard of arriving at a more accurate and consistent view. How are we testing it? This is where you get into the circular reasoning. I feel like you're saying something like, we have the best methods because we're so wise, and we're so wise because we have the best methods. Number 4. Ken's view when he uses his methodology is his other contribution. But when other people who agree with that same methodology don't agree with his conclusions, they're just dismissed. You say, unfortunately, the caliber of dissent, especially on the internet, is so truly below his weight class. I'm glad he outright ignores it. That said, I actually want to see more friction in this space, but not in its current toxic form, where it seems like everyone is trying to knock him off of some imaginary hill for the sake of their own egos and pet theories, end quote. Part of the reason it is toxic is because it is undealt with shadow issues. In many cases, it has nothing to do with egos and pet theories. That is a straw man of many people's perspectives. And you want to say the hill is imaginary, but you also act like no one is qualified to criticize Wilber. So it seems that at least you clearly believe in this hill. The more these criticisms get pushed down, ignored, and rejected, the more anger and spiteful backlash it will get. We're talking about serious people who put in real work, who have real concerns just being dismissed, and it ripples out to all the people who also agree that these are real problems. Integral doesn't have a healthy relationship to criticism, and so what do you expect? This attitude of it's truly so far below his weight class. His weight class? Are you kidding me? It's not about him. It's about what the community needs. It's not even about the critic. It's about the ideas and trying to create clarity in a healthy community. Like right now, I'm talking to you, Corey, but I'm also talking in public for the community. I represent the voices of almost 200 people, the IERM, or the Integral Emergentist Revolutionary Movement. There's 200 people in there that I know of who agree with these issues, and I'm sure there are way more than that who want to see these ideas brought into the light and dealt with skillfully in a way that Integral can be proud of. Where we are at right now is shameful and embarrassing. I know that we can do better, and I really hope this conversation now is a step in that direction. I think we need to get over this idea that Ken has no peers who are qualified to review him. It seems like you are actually putting him too high up on a pedestal when you say the caliber of this dissent is truly so far below his weight class. I'm glad he outright ignores it, to the point where real peer review is just ignored, and it always comes back to calling anyone who criticizes immature egomaniacs with shadow issues. I'm wondering how we're really measuring Ken Wilber's weight class. And are you just assuming that people who are not as popular or don't have books published must be just some nobody? Not only are you giving Ken Wilber too much credit, you're not giving the average integralist who has been studying his work for years enough credit. The teaching cancels out the teacher. Once the student has learned what the teacher has to offer, the gap between the two is mostly canceled out. Then the peer review process should begin, for the sake of their own egos and pet theories. That is in fact more Wilber's problem than a problem with his critics. He wants to make integral about his own ego and pet theories. This is why he is criticized, and tons of people see this who also find great value in Ken's work. Just today I came across this video by Mark Manson about the rise and fall of Ken Wilber, and this is also his argument. I'll put the link to his video down below in the description. Tons of people who highly value the Integral Project and vision are critical of Ken's work. Most of them are coming to the same conclusions about what the problems are, and to act like they are all on some ego trip trying to put out their own pet theories is dishonest or delusional. Again, this seems to be another type of hybrid fallacy, some kind of appeal to authority, popularity, and also some circular reasoning. It very much reminds me of the way traditional blue dogmatists deal with criticism. Even when the criticisms are orange rational, they reduce the person to red rebellious egomaniacs because they can't really step into that healthy orange space to meet them. So instead, they project their own red shadow onto the other person and fight it. It's the retreat from evolution because it's not really honest, open, healthy engagement that recognizes natural growth hierarchy. Healthy science, on the other hand, might be as of yet the most open, honest process that really aligns itself with whatever the good or true thing proves itself to be, not overstepping its bounds in terms of what it claims to honestly really know, and open to refinement. We need more of those values in our integral community, and less of this projecting ego and attacking it in others. Let's deal with this shadow. Let's bring it all out into the light and really try to deal with it and see what actually stands up to interrogation and scrutiny and tests in public. Egos be damned. Our pet bullshit be damned. Only the really good and true should stand. We want the real. I would love to see a meta-analysis of Wilber's criticisms. I bet you there's tons of universal themes, and those issues need to be addressed, not just ignored. As far as I can tell, there has been little to no attempt to take these concerns seriously, especially from Wilber. If Ken didn't see himself as up on a pedestal, then where are the debates or the active engagements? If one's ideas are really true and good, one can explain why they are correct, and it will be obvious if the other person is only in it for their ego. If the ideas are really good and the communication is really skillful, what is there to fear? This acting above it and insulting one's critics personally is so childish and rude and dismissive and unreasonable, especially when so many of the critics are coming to the same conclusions about the problems. So it's clearly not just a problem with one person's ego, unless we are talking about Wilber, but there are real disagreements about major topics. Honestly, there's going to be a split in our community if we can't find some way to actually integrate in open, honest peer review and criticism and stop this unreasonable, fallacious, willful ignorance. Wouldn't that be a sad day when a group called Integral that prides itself on including and integrating everything has a split in its community because people feel their criticisms are not being processed? Are we the best at skillful integration or not? And it's going to be real integralists versus Wilberians, or serious philosophers versus cult members. And the way you can tell the difference is the cult members don't have good arguments, just personal insults. Then I include this quote from Don Beck, where he says, "I reject all of this, Ken Wilber's assumption that mystics represent the highest stages of development and the integration of Aurobindo's third-tier stages. It is yet another example of Wilber attempting to exploit the Graves model and spiral dynamics. He lacks entirely the seventh code, integral, and has no idea how, when, where each of the codes have emerged. I will gladly challenge him to a public debate, but he still hides out in his loft in Denver. The whole idea of tiers is uniquely language from our work, which he steals in order to market his. The man lacks any ethical basis when he does so. He is nothing beyond red through orange. If he wants to develop his own system, then he should do so without exploiting my lifetime of work, which he continues to do. Our seventh and now emerging eighth code, second tier, are functional, resolve real-world problems, and emerge out of life conditions, not out of some mystical realm from Eastern viewpoints, which belong to those cultures, not to Western societies. The eighth code is beginning to take shape. It will not be the sixth code, green, on steroids, as many in the integral world believe. Dr. Don Beck. And I think when he says red through orange, I think he means red, egoic, blue, dogmatic, orange, interested in money and fame. And I mean, look, even Don Beck said he would gladly debate Wilber about his claims about third tier. Is Don Beck so far below his weight class? Who in the integral community wouldn't want to see that debate? And let's say hypothetically Ken Wilber would mop the floor with Frank Visser. Ha, I would still like to see it. And I think having the guts to face your critic says a lot about a person. Let's get a panel of critics against him if just one critic is way too easy for him. I'd be on it. I would even debate him by myself, just to hear him deal with the criticisms. I'm not afraid. What's the worst that could happen? He would school me, and we would all learn something? Actually, I think he is afraid to be in an open forum where his ideas are challenged, and he has to defend them. I think he's afraid to put himself in that position at all because it might make people question his ideas, and he might come off as wrong or less credible. I respect people who are willing to stand up for what they believe and deal with criticisms. Seeing how Wilber has dealt with his critics made me lose tons of respect for him, and I'm not the only one. Lots of people feel this way, even people who agree with him.
Though it's been said many times, many ways, I said it once before, but it bears repeating now.
The integral thing to do would be to do a meta-analysis of the criticisms and to deal with the main points. Forget who said it or how much it hurts one's ego. Quickly dismiss the bad critics and deal with the good criticisms. Wilber's response in the now infamous Erpy episode, link below, was just the opposite of that skillful integral high ground approach. He quickly acknowledges that he has good critics, ignores all their points, and then goes on to tell his so-called bad critics to suck his dick. Then he wants to act like it's a marker of his own maturity. And if you don't think so, you must just be green and overly sensitive. Wow. Well, it has nothing to do with being sensitive. My feelings weren't hurt because he said bad words or something. But I'm not impressed at all. In fact, I think this is probably the most immature and embarrassing thing I've ever seen a serious philosopher or scholar do on purpose, in public, even against the advice of his close friends. His weight class seems pretty low to me, if this is how he's going to deal with criticism. Think back to that first image in this note, or in this video, about the hierarchy of disagreement. These types of communications are really low on the scale of skillfulness. I don't care how good of a writer he is, or how flowery and fun his language is. He's ignoring the points, acting above it, and putting other people down, and that's unskillful as fuck. And if you don't like me saying as fuck at the end of that, I'm sorry, you must be green and overly sensitive. You say, I actually want to see more friction in this space. That's great. What do you think that would look like? What ideas do you have about how to skillfully process these tensions? Can I help you make this happen? What can we do? I also think this is really important. Number 5, Ken's library is big and he has read a lot. He has read a lot, I'm sure. But I do think there is probably a quantity-quality issue and maybe a problem with intention or approach. How many of those books are about Buddhism? How much does one really need to know about Buddhism in relation to all other subjects? Does one really need to know much about Buddhism? I know I've found value in it, but I also think all the things of value I've found in Buddhism I've also gotten elsewhere. And even things like meditative practices I think are often better when divorced from Buddhism. I mean, how much time has Ken spent meditating? He said he spent 5 years staring at the wall. While that's impressive in a way, I'm not sure it's the best use of one's time. Makes me think about the sunk cost fallacy. The misconception is you make rational decisions based on the future value of objects, investments, and experience. The truth is your decisions are tainted by the emotional investments you accumulate, and the more you invest in something, the harder it becomes to abandon it. It doesn't really matter how much you read if you are constantly working backwards from your assumptions and looking for more things to run through the filter of confirmation bias. Is he trying to prove his ideas wrong to see if they really stand up? It doesn't matter how much one reads if that person is not being skeptical of their own ideas, they won't grow. And we see how he deals with criticism. He acts above it. He runs and hides from it, ignores it, sweeps it under the rug and avoids it. He is willfully ignorant, it seems to me. A person can read 1,000,000 books on Bigfoot, have a huge library, know all about Bigfoot, and Bigfoot still might be some BS. So even if they have a huge library and know a lot, they might still be delusional and obsessed with some bullshit that doesn't even really matter. My point is not that Buddhism and Bigfoot are equivalent. It's just an example. The point is that focus, intention, investment, prioritization, healthy skepticism, and methodology are all factors in the quality of how input is processed. Quality is not reducible to quantity. Number 6, Corey sees my criticisms of what Ken presents as his integral view as picking nits. You say, quote, I feel like you are setting Ken up for failure, simply because you have a few niggling disagreements with details here and there, which do not have any effect whatsoever on the overall framework, which is clearly Ken's strength. These are not just a few niggling disagreements. I really wish that was the case. I think it's pretty clear that most every one of his problems is rooted in his bias towards Eastern religion and working backwards from those literal assumptions about I amness before the Big Bang. And this is not just an injunction or something like that. He explicitly says it's a literal claim. And we know he thinks that because it's clear in his ideas about cosmology, ontology, tetra arising all the way down and back, as well as his views on evolution, things Frank Visser and several others have been critical of for years. You hear him explicitly say, quote, it's a literal claim, end quote, if you watch his Subject Becomes Object video.
That's a literal koan. That's not a symbolic thing. There's something in you right now that existed prior to your parents' birth. And it's that sense of I amness. The journey of enlightenment, if you want to put it in a simplified form, is the journey that moves you from your empirical self, anything that you can see or know about yourself, any object, to pure awareness, pure self, your true self, the self that cannot be made an object, but is the space in which all of this is arising. That's a literal koan. That's not a symbolic thing.
But feel free to scroll back just a bit and listen to him say it in context. Check for the link down below. For a long time, I gave Ken the, quote, trans-rational benefit of the doubt. Like, oh, he's just speaking poetically. Until I realized that he always talks about absolute unity in terms of only Eastern symbol sets, and he takes it literally. It's also very clear and explicit in his claims about science that he takes these religious dogmatic ideas literally. Wilber's claims about absolute consciousness before the Big Bang are not scientific. Those ideas are not reasonably established. In fact, it looks like those ideas are not true at all. Wilber is working backwards from his religious ideas and trying to back these ideas up with, quote, deep science. But as we have seen, there is no good peer review. People that have performed the injunction and don't agree are rejected, ignored, put down, and dismissed. When it comes to religious communities, if one doesn't agree with the dogmatic interpretation of religious experience, they are told they're just not open or practiced enough, and keep trying, and maybe one day you will be as mature and awakened as us. Watch, this will happen in the comments below. Someone will explain that I'm just not evolved, mature, honest, or practiced enough, and that's why I don't agree. I've seen several fundamentalist Christians do this same thing. It's not good real science or peer review. It's not really falsifiable. So he distorts science and evolution in favor of his own view. He's looking in the wrong quadrant for data, as if the way to know the absolute truth of the universe is to stare at one's empty mind. He's taking one traditional mythology literally. This is dogma and a pre-trans confusion, and making claims about things that nobody knows. He's not being humble like a reasonable scholar would be. He's overstepping his bounds and making claims he can't back up. And that's at least 3 ways he's breaking the rules of this beloved methodology. He messes up religious integration by favoring one tradition and trying to act like one tradition gets it right and has the most mature people, or that you can both be integral and submit to one tradition. That's about as integral as claiming to be an integral empiricist. It doesn't work that way. That is not an integrative meta approach. It's reductive. He ends up having as much integrity as a preacher, acting like he knows things he doesn't know and trying to convince others of it. As a teacher myself, and as a person who grew up in the church, I feel it is important for me to not act like I know things I don't really know. I don't want to be a misleader or a confuser. I see that as what Wilber is doing by pretending to know things and spreading religious dogma as if it was established fact. He messes up developmental psychology by trying to sneak Aurobindo state stages in and stack them on top of everything else. Even Don Beck thinks this is irresponsible bullshit that is distorting the meta-analysis, as he said above. Sri Aurobindo is not a developmental psychologist and is not doing scientific tests. He is a mystic. Why are we comparing apples and oranges in this way? That is not how you do a meta-analysis. You say, quote, which do not have any effect whatsoever on the overall framework, which is clearly Ken's strength, end quote. When one breaks the rules to integrate in one's own bias and changes the map to look how they want, that does mess up the framework. And it kind of shows applying his methodology is not his strength. What is the point of having a good methodology if one betrays it in favor of personal preference? In doing so, he also betrays the people who follow him and believe in him as an honest teacher or leader. He betrays the integrity of the whole integral movement by making it about him and not about the age or the stage. These are major problems in all main areas and topics he touches. He is in general a bad, unhealthy example of integration. These are not just a few niggling disagreements. I see him seriously mucking it up. So do many others, and it has nothing to do with our egos or wanting the throne for ourselves or daddy shadow issues. It has to do with real peer review and wanting real integral integrity out of a deep care for the power and potential of integral done right. Integralists are not integralists because we like the look of Ken's shiny head or the sound of his voice. We care about integral because we care about a healthy integral vision. We are critical because we care about getting it right because ideas matter. When you take a closer look and are critical, these ideas that he presents do not stand up, and it becomes clear that Wilber is working backwards from his preferences. As I said before, my goal is to help birth a healthy integral age. This is important. If we're going to work on this goal, and we don't have a shared vision about how to really have a skillful, overarching theory, we are right back into trying to take one traditional dogma literally, or the green swamp. And that is not really transrational or integral. It would be reductionist, violent, and rooted in outdated, wrong, unfounded claims, qualifying the unqualifiable. This just means future generations will have to do more work to deconstruct and reconstruct to get something that is actually healthy and good. It might be a better superstition, but I think we can do better and have an actually integral religious system, more Joseph Campbell style. A tradition that says we are all storytellers and we can see the common themes and lessons across all human traditions, as well as the interesting variations and technologies that come from particular traditions, divorced from the superstitious dogma and local translations. That is what we need, because it's fair to everyone. It doesn't act like we should all be dogmatic Buddhists or Christians. Frank Visser recently said to me, quote, in my 7-part review series of The Religion of Tomorrow, I have tried to turn a culture of claims and statements into one of arguments and reasoning. Wilberites will see this as a step back from the level of spiritual vision. I see it as a step forward if integral is ever to become more than a new religion. He's right. If we want to be taken seriously, we need to do way better. This is not even everything. These are just a few of the major problems that distort the whole integral view and project. There are other issues too, like too much of a focus on translation, or charging too much for events, but those things are not the major problems. Those are the few niggling disagreements. Number 7. It's silly, feeling the need to call yourself more integral than the guy who invented the methodology. Well, I think it's silly to think that most future integralists wouldn't be better, smarter integralists than the guy who invented the methodology. He is literally the first word on what it is to be integral, not hardly the last. I can spend a fraction of the time Wilber spent learning and assimilating his knowledge just by hearing or reading him. That's a huge advantage, don't you think? Did Wilber have a Wilber to learn from? If he did, don't you think he would be even better? I do. Employ your time in improving yourselves by other men's writings, so that you shall gain easily what others have labored hard for. That's a Socrates quote. The internet is 27 years old. Ken Wilber put out his first book 47 years ago. You don't think growing up with access to the internet is a huge advantage? You don't think by the time our kids are grown, they won't be way better and smarter than us? Are you familiar with the Flynn effect? Future generations have our shoulders to stand on. If they're not better than us, they must be mucking it up. But let's answer these questions and take them seriously. You ask, are you claiming to have a superior cosmic address to Ken? I guess I am. I think I'm more healthily integrally informed, and I think Ken Wilber is more like a late green, early integral, early stage vision logic with lots of pre-trans confusion. I think he has a lot of work to do, but I don't think he will make much progress because everyone has told him he's the most enlightened genius ever, so he thinks he has arrived. I think he mistakes his delusional, dogmatic, pre-rational view about states for transcendent wisdom. And let's be honest, he has contributed stuff, but he is mostly standing on the shoulders of lots of other people's work as well. It's Hegel mixed with Sri Aurobindo, Jean Gebser, Don Beck, among others. You ask, are you saying you have a deeper and more consistent awakening than Ken Wilber does? I think he's probably better at state training than I am, but in terms of the Wilber-Combs matrix, I think his translation of his experience is dogmatic and immature. Again, there's the problem of the pre-trans fallacy, and his awakening is clouded by the dogmatic worldview it exists within, that he is not deconstructed, but takes literally. And it distorts his view of science, religion, and psychology, as we've already explained. And these are the main topics he talks about. So if by awakened, we mean clearly seeing reality as it is, then yes, I would say I have a deeper awakening. And I provide a link to a video I made about Ken's problems with outdated interpretations or dogmatic Buddhist awakening. Check in the description for a link if you want to learn more about that. Instead of understanding that they're all true poetically, there are universal things being talked about, but they're also all not true. And you have to get that too. That none of them are the absolute truth, but they all have like a poetic piece of the truth. You have to realize that people in Jesus's time, with finger quotes, and in Buddha's time, this is 2,500 years ago, before we had microscopes and telescopes. And their way to get people to realize that we're all interconnected in this big picture kind of way is like way over everybody's head. But now, in the year 2016, it's a scientific fact. You have every single one of your favorite scientists on that song of the Symphony of Science. If you Google that, you'll have Neil deGrasse Tyson and Carl Sagan and Bill Nye and all these dudes on there talking about the interconnectedness of us all.
We're all connected to each other biologically, to the earth chemically, to the rest of the universe atomically.
I think nature's imagination.
I kind of feel like, even though I do like some Buddhist poetry and some of this kind of stuff, that in a way, a lot of the times, that kind of poetry actually creates more confusion than it does clarity, because the symbols are so outdated, because there's so much muck for it to get caught up in. If you can't talk about it in plain language, then you probably don't have too much business talking about it in those old school religious symbols. You got to be able to break it down into regular terms. If you really understand what Buddha's enlightenment is in the context of his story, in the context of his tradition, like not only do you have to root it in reaction to Hinduism, because it is, that's where Buddha's worldview is. So his Buddhism is in reaction to Hinduism. So you have to understand Hinduism to really understand Buddhism. If you see what he's doing in his story, that he's trying to teach the way to have this experience. So Buddhism is Mahayana, Hinayana. These are ferry boats. These are supposed to be a set of practices that will give you an experience to help you have this realization. But you don't need to do that to have that realization. And now, in the year 2016, doing all that might actually wind up confusing you, giving you more cultural conditioning that really, to be truly awake and truly free, you might have to transcend and include, and might leave you more confused about the nature of reality than if you would have taken on science as a mystery tradition.
So are you saying that the aspect of enlightenment that one would experience upon fulfillment of a Buddhist path gets molded by the cultural context of the Buddhist dialogue that surrounds it? So the enlightenment experience is occurring through a certain lens?
Yep. It colors it, it distorts it, and it frames it in terms of Hindu idealism. Like, for example, this idea of going back to source, all rooted in Hindu creation mythology. The Buddha, he drank from that golden bowl with all the nourishment, right? And he threw it in the river. And he says, if the bowl goes upstream against the flow of life, then I will achieve enlightenment. And even his temptations towards the end are the going backwards of the creation myth. Because in the beginning there was this being of beings who was all that there was. After infinitudes of nothingness, out of nowhere, this nothing said the word I. Then it felt afraid and was like, oh, wait, it's only me. Then it's like, it felt desire. It's like, I wish it wasn't only me. And so in Buddhism, you go backwards. You get rid of desire, which cancels out fear, which cancels out I, and gets you back to this kind of nothingness consciousness before the Big Bang. So Buddhism is itself framed in terms of this idealistic Hindu creation myth. And when you believe in that kind of an awakening, to some extent you have taken on this Hindu idealistic frame through which to see the world. And that is a distortion of reality. I think the main reason I have a better view is because of the influence of other teachers who I do think are more awake and more well-read than Wilber. Example, my favorite teacher is Joseph Campbell, and I think he is a much better example of what integral religion should look like than what Wilber presents in his newest book. I do think he has read way more in those relevant fields than Wilber has. In fact, Wilber says he bases his idea on the pre-trans fallacy on Joseph Campbell's work. Check out the video linked in the description down below, though Wilber doesn't really seem to apply the standard.
Joseph Campbell, probably the recent era's greatest mythology, or interpretive mythology, and somebody I certainly cut my teeth on. I was a great admirer of his and a really extraordinary work that he did. He used to very, very vehemently, actually, say that there's really sort of two types of mythology. Your mythology forms two different functions. He wouldn't use the terms pre-rational and trans-rational, but the way we're talking about them is the way he would talk about these two functions of mythology. And the first function is when mythology is taken to be concretely real. The fundamentalist, religious believer, they don't take these things metaphorically. These are not symbols of some higher truth. These are the truth. Now, Moses really parted the Red Sea. This doesn't symbolize anything. All of those would be what Campbell would call a concrete, literal belief in mythology. But what some people do, particularly educated, intelligent people like us that are trying to get some meaning in our lives, we can tend to take myths as deeply symbolic of something else. That's a literal koan. That's not a symbolic thing. There's something in you right now that existed prior to your parents' birth. And it's that sense of I amness.
Think back to the link I shared before, where Ken is claiming that Eastern religious ideas about cosmology are literally true. Campbell's view is not as short-sighted as Wilber's. I'm standing on his shoulders, and because of the depth and greatness of his work, I can see a better view. See how this is not about my ego? Am I trying to dethrone Joseph Campbell to boost my ego? No. I love him. I tell tons of people to check out his work all the time, and I feel no embarrassment about it. And I am embarrassed of Ken Wilber because I think he messes it up so bad with his pet theories, unfounded religious beliefs, and his huge ego. In general, I don't want to tell people about Wilber. I wish there was a better example of integral to point to. I would rather people learn the theory from me, at least at first, than from Wilber, which is part of why I'm trying to work on media to teach it. I'm having to do extra work to try and save the baby or the diamond that is integral theory from the dirty bathwater or the dunghill of Ken Wilber's biases and ego. Also, it's not like people just go after Wilber. Integral critics, including myself, go after all bad examples of integration, which is trying to make a case for why one's belief system is integral. For example, I made a video being very critical of Steve McIntosh and his bad, unskillful bias integration. You can check for that down below as well. Frank Visser and others have also done work to call out these bad examples that compromise the integrity of our projects. You might want to act like view doesn't matter, but Ken's view and Steve's view are not compatible, so what should we do about that? That's the problem with everyone just trying to make it whatever they want it to be. That's the green swamp. That's not integrating diversity with discernment and us reasonably building together. If one doesn't see this as a problem, they must still be only thinking about individuals and not about how we're going to create a healthy integral culture or society together. This isn't about ego. It's about how honest and balanced our approach is, whose shoulders we're standing on, and what is really good and true. You ask, are you saying you're more familiar with the terrain of third-tier development and the semiotics of transcendence than Ken Wilber is? I'm saying he's delusional when it comes to his claims about third-tier development. Sri Aurobindo is not a developmental psychologist. If we're doing a meta-analysis of stages of development, let's compare apples with apples, shall we? You ask, are you saying that you're better read than Ken and are coming from a data set that is larger or more complete than his? I'm saying I've done better things with my time. I might not know as much as him, but what I do know has put me in a better, more healthy, and realistic place in my development. Now listen, I fully admit that I'm not perfect, and I have a lot of lines that need more development. I have shadow issues to deal with in my own life. For example, around making money. Like I need to get better at it. I'm sure Ken Wilber could totally school me on how to make more money, and I would be glad to learn. I'm a passionate person, so I do a lot of things for the love of doing it. Like the time I've put into this note and this video. So much so that I struggle getting paid and making a living or raising money to do big projects. I'm still learning and growing all the time. I don't feel like I've made it or that I'm realized. I feel like I'm making it and that I'm realizing it. It's a daily practice and a daily struggle. You ask, are you saying that you would have been able to create the integral methodology yourself from whole cloth? No. I think integral theory is better and more fleshed out than what I was working on by the time I discovered integral theory. But I am one of these people who was working on a book making several of the same distinctions before I ever knew about integral theory. Recently, I found this page from my journal from about 3 or 4 years before I discovered integral theory, and I was really taken back by some of the implicit integral ideas within it. I'm not saying that it is integral theory, but it has some of the same ideas and elements. Divisions of 4, not necessarily related to ontology and epistemology, but it could be applied to that or any other thing. And a spiraling dialectic, not necessarily having to do with stages of development, but it's well on its way and clearly resonates well. Ken himself has said many times that this is our territory, and he just codified it first. I had different plans and ideas about what to do with this knowledge when I came across integral theory. And I stopped all that I was doing and went back into the cave for years to assimilate what integral had to teach me. I'm glad that I don't have to do that work, and I'm glad to climb up on top of Ken's shoulders and take the work even further, integrating the pros of his work and trying to negate the unhealthy limited cons. That is the project of refinement at the cutting edge. These questions in general are meant to humble and intimidate, but I will not shrink away. I will answer honestly. You can say I have a big ego if you want, but I don't claim to be anything beyond healthy turquoise, integrally informed, world or cosmocentric, with late-stage vision logic or ego construct awareness. I want to help birth a collective individualistic society in the integral age. I think people claiming to be superhuman or that they have magical powers are actually the delusional egomaniacs, and they don't really have the guts to put their ideas to the test. People who believe in a supernatural don't appreciate how super the natural actually already is. The ego wants more. I just want to be on the side of whatever actually can demonstrate its truth and goodness. I'm not working backwards from my preference. I'm willing to question everything to try and figure out what is actually going on. I'm not looking for some philosophy that will tell me I'm a superhuman who can learn to have special magic powers. My power is that I know my own strengths and weaknesses and have some knowledge of the patterns of ideas and development. That is it. One can always learn more, but I don't really think it gets better than that. If someone could actually demonstrate they have further abilities with reasonable tests, that would be something. But every time those claims are tested, they always fail. There are tons of people who are offering tons of money to anyone who can reasonably demonstrate these things. And I provide a list of prizes for evidence of the paranormal from Wikipedia. And all those prizes are forever unclaimed because, frankly, it's bullshit. And it's part of the integral methodology that if a person makes these types of claims, they should have to demonstrate them empirically. Let me ask you, would the average psychologist have been able to be Freud in Freud's time? No, probably not. But the average psychologist is probably a better psychologist than Freud now, because he was the first word. We are all just people standing on the shoulders of others. Ken Wilber is no great genius. He got lucky. He was in the right place at the right time. And yes, he put in the work as well. But if it wasn't him who came up with it, it would have been someone else. And they very well might have done a better job than Wilber. Maybe not. But it has more to do with the zeitgeist than it has to do with the greatness of Wilber. Integral theory is an idea that's time has come, and instead of doing the work to refine it and make it better, we spend way too much time worshiping Ken. He becomes a boundary to real integral progress. You ask, is there some part of you that wants to see yourself as better than Ken? I don't care about being better to stroke my ego. Actually, I would like it if Ken was better, because it would mean I could just happily share his work and respect him, like I do with many of my other teachers who I do think mostly get it right and have integrity. I'm happy to be a follower that goes with the flow as long as the leadership is good and healthy. These problems make more work for me. That's time I don't get to spend doing other things. I would much rather be able to look up to Ken, keep learning from him, feel like he's going to take care of it and has figured it all out, and be able to point to him and say, go check out his work, he knows what he's talking about. Unfortunately, that is not the case. No one wants to be the responsible parent figure. People are either thrust into this role or they step into it out of deep care and a feeling of responsibility. But better how? Do I want to be better for the integral movement than Ken? Yes, I do. But again, this isn't dick measuring. It's about getting the work done and doing it right. I am claiming that he's mucking up the work. I wish we could stop making it about him and start dealing with the actual claims. The proof is in the pudding, and it's not measured in popularity. I didn't know more than Wilber before I came across Wilber. I even agreed with him for a long while, but through being in the integral world space, applying the methodology, seeing the talk and the critical work within the community, trying to share his ideas with other smart people in the world, I feel I outgrew him. Lots of people have outgrown him after years and years of thinking critically about his ideas. Again, I'm representative of lots of other voices who also feel that they have outgrown Wilber. And we are not egomaniacs with shadow issues, just like integralists have outgrown Green in a healthy way. To outgrow Wilber is just to be more or better at integral. It doesn't make one fourth tier or something. Number 8, it's not a cult of personality because Corey can disagree even though he admits that Ken probably still knows better. Okay, I just thought this was funny. You say, quote, how can you tell it's not a cult of personality? You can have your own view, and you can disagree with Ken's view all day long. I disagree with him every other time I see him, though I am never foolish enough to dismiss his point of view altogether because the guy is way smarter and more realized than I am, and usually he sees some angle I'm not yet aware of. End quote. So you disagree with him, but you doubt yourself. What do you do with that disagreement? Do you process the tension or ignore it and just assume that he knows more than you? You know how I know it is a cult of personality? Because when one is critical of his ideas, they get attacked personally, and the actual content of the claims are ignored. The integral movement needs to be about humanity coming together and skillfully working with a shared methodology to make a better world, not about any one person. Having a great methodology is not the end goal. It's the first step. This is no time to stop and celebrate. It's time to get to work. It's about what we can do with this methodology that makes it great. I can see that Don Beck really understands this. Look at what he's tried to do with spiral dynamics in the world. This is why we really need to focus more on building an integral project that is skillful, open, transparent, and interactive, that can refine and get better over time. Again, less like a religion with a dogma and a priest, not just Eastern Enlightenment, more like science with peer review and tests. More of a focus on the values of the Western Enlightenment. Definitely both, but right now we are way off balance, unfocused and unhealthy. We can do way better skillfully integrating in lots of perspectives towards our shared vision than if we all just focus on how smart Ken Wilber is. The classic Einstein quote, "Science without religion is lame. Religion without science is blind," feels very appropriate here. Right now, Ken Wilber is our biggest boundary to the healthy realization of our vision. He needs to let himself be wrong in public and deal with it with honor and dignity. Maybe change his mind or stand corrected. Being able to be wrong skillfully is a huge marker of respect for me. It shows real honesty, flexibility, and a willingness to learn and grow and side with the actually true and good over one's ego. The less willing a person is to do this, the less truly awake they are, it seems to me. I think if Wilber was truly awakened and past his ego, he would feel the need to make the integral movement about what we can build together. In the last 30 years, what has been established that you think is an example of integralists coming together to make a real difference with the power of our methodology in the world? I can certainly think of great individuals who have taken this methodology and applied it to a field in great ways, but there is no larger group or system created to build and refine. When we think integral, do we think transformative, powerful movement, or do we think Ken Wilber and his books? Something about that needs to change. 9. Some critics have refined the theory, but many of his critics are strawmanning him or caught in some little detail. Sure, I have seen this stuff too, and told these people that they don't know what they're talking about, that if they want to be critical, they need to take some time and try to understand it first. In general, if one cannot say what is good or true about a view, one has no business being critical of it. But I wouldn't say that is the majority of what I've seen. I've seen a lot of good stuff too. I've already given examples of good critics like Don Beck, Frank Visser, and Mark Manson, but I can give several more if you would like as well. Mark Edwards, Andrew Smith, Ray Harris, David Lane, Jeffrey Falk, just to name a few. I really like Julian Mark Walker's note called The Patchwork Cloak of Integral Theory. I'll put a link to that down in the description, as well as this other note I like by an author who goes by Bob. I guess he's anonymous or something. His note is called Has Ken Wilber Jumped the Shark? And I'll put a link to that down below as well. Okay, and lastly, 10. All philosophers have been wrong at some point. Who cares? It doesn't diminish the methodology. Philosophers are always partially wrong. Why focus on their actual philosophy when they used to look so good in a Speedo? Julian Mark Walker. It does affect the methodology. People will never learn the methodology if they think Wilber is a pseudo-intellectual making unfounded claims about reality and working backwards from outdated debunked religious ideas. Often most scholarly people don't take it seriously enough to ever even get to the point of learning the methodology. Or mystics hear about his spiritual ideas, think they must already know, and never bother to learn the theory. It may be the scholarly person's loss, but they are right not to take Wilber seriously. But to act like these things are minor, or don't matter, or that it doesn't affect the brand or the theory just seems dishonest or delusional. I'll ask again, what do you think we can do to better process the tensions in our community? Can we agree that it starts by taking the criticism seriously and actually addressing the points? Using the methodology? I hope so. We need to if we are going to be healthy, really build and refine. If we can't do it, then I'm not sure what hope there is for humanity. Let me share this quote one more time because I think it's important. Saving the biosphere depends first and foremost on human beings reaching mutual understanding and unforced agreement as to common ends. And that intersubjective accord occurs only in the noosphere. Anything short of that noospheric accord will continue to destroy the biosphere. Ken Wilber. The stakes are really high, Corey. We need to take this so seriously. We don't have time to reduce everything back to subjectivity and believe whatever we want. We cannot turn integral into another green swamp of confusion. We need to step up and be responsible. Working on a co-creation, a nation totally out of control. We gotta get focused, gotta get organized, or demise will soon unfold. We got all these maps and plans in our hands, helping people understand what the light is for. If we can't come together with a plan in the future, we ask you, man, what the fuck you hide this for? What is the best way we can figure out how to grow and refine integral together? What can we do to create a more healthy process for honest engagement, critical refinement, and clarity? How can we bring more creative friction online in a more healthy way? What can I do to help? This is super important stuff, Corey, and I know if you and I put our minds together with our influence, we can really help our community and our project to be better. If you value this, please join me. I look forward to your response. That being said, please do take your time with it. It took me at least a couple of months to craft what I consider to be my best response to you. I'm more interested in the quality of your reply than I am in the quickness with which it's delivered. Please take your time, really think about what I'm saying, and what the best response to my concerns might be. Sincerely, David. I hope you enjoyed this note, and I hope that you will like and subscribe and share. If these ideas interest you, check out some of my other videos about how we can do integral in a more healthy and skillful way. Peace.